Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Carmen Polito. I'm the Neighborhood Affairs Manager with the City of Miami Beach. So it's now 6:05, so I think we're ready to get started. Welcome. Tonight is our first, it's a joint meeting with the WAVNA West Avenue Neighborhood Association. And today we are going to go over planning and zoning within your neighborhood. And you're going to see on the call today, we do have some members of the board on the WAVNA board that are signed in as panelists. And then at the end of the meeting, you're going to have an opportunity to have join the conversation, ask any questions that you may have. Before we get started, I do want to recognize we have Commissioner Stephen Miner, who's joining us, as well as his aide Amadeus. And I also see Julio Rodriguez, who is the aide to Commissioner Mark Samuelin. And I also see just a slew of active community members. Thank you for joining. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Tom Mooney, who's going to do a quick introduction. And then before we get started, we'll open it up to Tim. And we have Tim, and excuse me, I didn't introduce you, our panelists that are on. We have Mr. Tom Mooney. He's our Director of Planning as well. Joining us from the planning team is Rogelio Madden. We also have Lauren Fertel. Lauren's your South Beach Neighborhood Affairs Coordinator. We have Tim Carr and Michael Edwards, who are both on the board of the West Avenue Neighborhood Association. So now with that, I'll turn it over to Tom. After Tom gets us started, we'll turn it back over to the West Avenue board, and then we have a presentation. We'll go through the presentation. There were some questions submitted in advance from the West Avenue group, and I think we're going to answer those in the presentation, and then at the end, we'll open up to Q&A. So Tom?
Okay, good evening, everybody. It's good to see everybody virtually tonight. This is, as Kevin mentioned, the first what we're calling sort of a Planning and Zoning 101 town hall meeting. And this initiative, actually, we have to credit Commissioner Miner for this. He had made a referral to the Land Use Committee late in 2021, and he had requested that we discuss organizing something like this along with the Communications Department. So Kevin and Lauren and their team have also been very instrumental in putting these together. And we've been reaching out to all of the different homeowners associations to gauge their interest and availability. WAVNA was one of the first to respond, and so you're going to be the first one we're doing. So any improvements that we need to make, certainly we will do so for future ones. After the WAVNA board speaks, I'm going to then share my screen. I put together a PowerPoint presentation, and first I'm going to go over basically what the planning department's role is in development. And then I'm going to get into more specific regulations that are germane to the West Avenue area. And then I did receive a copy of all the questions that were raised, and I have responses to those, and I'll have those on a separate screen. And then if there are any other questions that might come up. Before we go ahead and turn it over to the WAVNA board, I didn't know if Commissioner Miner wanted to say a few words or add anything to this.
And we will go ahead and send him a request there.
I see his name, but he's muted.
And yeah, and I think we'll probably come back to the commissioner
Okay.
A little bit later on. Perfect. So with that, we'll turn it over to Mr. Tim Carr. And Tim, if you want to lead us through the board introductions and maybe give us a quick opening, and then we'll be happy to kind of go through our presentation.
Good evening. Thank you, Kevin, and good evening, everyone. Just again, on behalf of the West Ave Neighborhood Association, again, my name is Tim Carr. We just want to welcome the active participation. We have about 32 participants right now, so really appreciate the interest. From our board tonight is also Mike Edwards, and we have Amy Litos, and we also have Gail Durham, and also Corinne. has joined as well. So with that, again, I think we have a packed agenda, a lot of good questions that were sent in advance. So we really appreciate this opportunity to kind of be out of the chute. And then, if you don't mind, throughout the presentation or towards the end, Mike Edwards, my fellow board member, will help bring it home. So I'll turn it back over to you, and thank you again. Appreciate everyone's participation.
Great. So now, Tom, you should have your ability to share the screen.
Correct. Did Commissioner Minor want to say anything before I started, or because I noticed he's muted?
Yeah, no, he has the ability to unmute, but I think he's going to wait till the end.
Okay, perfect. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, everybody. All right. Sorry about that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start off. I've got a couple, the first couple of slides that I'm going to present deal with what the role of the planning department is in terms of development, comprehensive planning, and zoning in the city. And it's going to be a little bit kind of a broader overview, just so you get an idea of the different things that we do. We do have a defined mission statement, which is an urban planning vision for Miami Beach, preserving the city's unique design heritage, enhancing quality of the residential neighborhoods, commercial districts, and resort recreation and entertainment areas, as well as administering regulatory standards and policies. In terms of our organization, we wear a number of different hats as it pertains to professional planning. And this includes comprehensive and resilience planning, zoning, design review, historic preservation, neighborhood and community planning, and regulatory review. We also staff 4 major development review boards. I'm sure most of you are familiar with these boards: the Planning Board, the Board of Adjustment, the Design Review Board, and the Historic Preservation Board. The powers of the duties of the Planning Board include the review of conditional use permits, and conditional use permits typically are neighborhood impact establishments. And those are establishments that have an occupational load or an occupational content that's determined by the fire marshal of greater than either 200 persons or 300 persons. And that applies to whether you have entertainment or not. So if you're an establishment that has over 200 persons and you have entertainment, then conditional use approval is required. Similarly, if you don't have entertainment, but your occupational content is greater than 300 persons and you serve alcohol, then you are still required to get planning board approval. Additionally, conditional use approval is required for developments in commercial districts that are over 50,000 square feet. There are also other conditional uses that are listed in each different zoning district in the city, and I'm going to get to the ones that are specific to the zoning districts in the West Avenue area as we get into this presentation. The Planning Board also reviews all amendments to the land development regulations, and I'm going to touch on code amendments separately, but they are required by ordinance as a local planning agency to provide a recommendation to the City Commission with regard to any amendments to the land development regulations. The Planning Board also reviews any proposed changes to zoning district boundaries, as well as any proposed comprehensive plan amendments and future land use amendments. And the Planning Board consists of 7 voting members that are all appointed by the City Commission. The Board of Adjustment has the responsibility of reviewing variance requests. They also consider and decide appeals of administrative official determinations, and they serve as the city's floodplain management board. The Board of Adjustment is also 7 members who are appointed by the City Commission. The Review Board has the responsibility of reviewing all applications requiring design review approval for properties not located within a designated historic district or as an historic site. And while these are primarily commercial and multifamily properties, there are certain types of single-family homes that also require the review and approval of the Design Review Board. Primarily, these are homes that propose to replace existing pre-1942 single-family homes, as well as homes that may be requesting specific waivers for which the Design Review Board can consider. And the membership requirement for the DRB is also 7 members, and they are appointed by the City Commission. The Historic Preservation Board has a similar responsibility to the DRB for areas within historic districts in that they review applications for certificates of appropriateness for new constructions and alterations. But they also have the responsibility of reviewing certificates of appropriateness for demolition for any property located within a historic district, and they have binding authority with regard to demolition. And then finally, the Historic Preservation Board has the responsibility of recommending to the City Commission proposed historic districts and proposed historic sites. And the HPB, which is also appointed by the Commission, consists of 7 members. Attached is to this slide is an historic district map. And as you can see, the colored areas are all locally designated historic districts. And as you can see, they comprise a fairly large area of the city. So the Historic Preservation Board's jurisdiction is fairly far-reaching because it includes any property within the areas within these colored boundaries. I didn't provide a zoning district map for the entire city because we would be here all night talking about every district, but I did want to include a portion of the zoning map that is specific to the West Avenue area. And the West Avenue area is generally defined as that area that is north of 5th Street and south of Collins Canal to the immediate west of Alton Road. And as you can see by this map, the lion's share of the West Avenue area is residential, and it's primarily composed of RM3 properties, which is high-density residential along the waterfront. There is a limited area of waterfront that's zoned RM2, and then you have some RM2 located along the interior portions, and then you have a significant portion that is zoned RM1. There are some commercial districts, primarily CD1 and CD2, that exist along Alton Road, all the way from 5th Street, all the way up to Collins Canal. Each of these districts has different regulations. And what I wanted to do was go over some of the regulations that were specific to the West Avenue area. And I'm going to go ahead and start with the residentially zoned areas. And those are the areas on the previous map that are zoned RM3, RM2, and RM1. We have a West Avenue overlay. And previously, this overlay, which was created in 2002 with the primary purpose of incentivizing and encouraging the retention of the significant MIMO buildings, this overlay, and this overlay also instituted new construction regulations. When it was first developed, it did allow for bed and breakfast and suite hotel uses within the RM1 portions of the overlay, primarily to encourage the restoration of existing buildings. Over the last 2 years, at the request of WABNA, these 2 uses have been removed from the overlay, primarily because of issues surrounding transient uses. There are some, while there are no bed and breakfasts that were approved, there were some suite hotel uses that were approved prior to the prohibition of suite hotels within the RM1 area and RM2 area. However, offices do remain as an allowable accessory use within this overlay, although we have not seen any existing historically significant buildings, MIMO buildings, adaptively reused for an office use. The primary uses that are permitted within the overlay are apartment, townhome, and single-family residences. Although in other areas of the city, permit hotel uses. 2013, the West Avenue area prohibited hotel uses in all districts that are residential. So that did include the RM2 and RM3 districts. Those were already prohibited in the RM1 district. There were 3 properties that were able to grandfather themselves in. Actually, I'm sorry, 4 properties within the West Avenue area that were able to grandfather themselves in at the time of adoption for a hotel use. That includes the property on 12th and West Avenue, the Mondrian Hotel, the Gathering, and the Bikini Hostel. And so those properties were grandfathered in as hotel uses. However, no new hotel uses were permitted, nor have any been permitted. With regard to short-term rentals are permitted citywide within the RM2 and RM3 districts, and that would include the areas of the West Avenue overlay and the West Avenue area. Short-term rentals are prohibited in the RM1 district. So the only areas where legally someone could do short-term rental would be the RM2 and RM3 portions of the West Avenue area. As you may be aware, we are preempted by state law currently from expanding prohibitions on short-term rentals to other districts that did not have that prohibition when the city originally adopted its ordinance back in 2011. With regard to the specific regulations for these areas, RM1 areas have a 1.25 maximum FAR and a maximum building height of 50 feet. Also, it's important to point out that within the West Avenue area, there is a 2-lot limit for aggregation. And the reason for this particular development regulation is to ensure that the RM1 areas remain lower in scale and that new construction reflects the built context. Generally, when you can aggregate 3 or more lots, the buildings tend to take on a much more massive appearance and massing. Within RM2 areas, the maximum FAR is 2.0 and the maximum building height is 60 feet. And then finally, the waterfront areas that are zoned to RM3, depending upon the lot size, the FAR will either be 2.25, which would be applicable to lots that are less than 45,000 square feet. And for those lots that are greater than 45,000 square feet, the maximum FAR would be 2.75. And the maximum building height for RM3 properties is 150 feet. As far as development regulations for the commercial areas, and these are primarily along Alton Road and would include those portions of side streets that are east of the alleyway. Commercial uses generally include retail, restaurant, and personal service establishments. There are some specific conditional uses that I'll get to on the next 2 slides. Within the CD1 portions of the area, the maximum FAR is 1.0 and the maximum building height is 40 feet. Within CD2 areas, the maximum FAR is 1.5 for commercial uses, but there is a bonus of 0.5 for residential. And so if somebody's doing a project that has at least 0.5 FAR of residential, they could potentially go up to a 2.0 FAR in the CD2 district. And the maximum building height is between 50 and 60 feet, depending upon whether or not structured parking is proposed. We also have a separate overlay for offices that would allow for a maximum building height of 75 feet on the west side of Alton Road, but that's only if the entire project is an office use. Could they avail themselves of the 75-foot height limit? Additionally, we have very specific alcoholic beverage establishment regulations for the west side of Alton Road, pursuant to section 142-310. And these include a 2 a.m. last call for private properties, and then any sidewalk cafe operations would need to close no later than midnight. Commercial uses on rooftops are limited to restaurants only, and those operations must cease by 11 p.m. on weekdays and midnight on weekends. Additionally, these outdoor restaurants are only permitted to have ambient background music. They could not have entertainment level music. Indoor entertainment require conditional use approval regardless of the occupational of the establishment. Outdoor bar counters are prohibited. And then the only exception to these regulations are for outdoor movie theaters that exist from 16th Street to Collins Avenue. And then finally, we do have an historic overlay on the east side of Alton Road. And those regulations, however, are more specific to development regulation. And they were put in place in 2013 primarily to address the impacts of new construction on the lower scale Flamingo Park area to the immediate east. Conditional uses are uses, as I'd indicated previously, that require planning board approval. So they are not allowed as of right. However, if somebody wanted to make an application to the planning board to seek conditional use approval, they could do that, and the planning board would have the latitude to approve the conditional use with or without certain conditions. Within the CD1 district, the allowable conditional uses include adult congregate living facilities and nursing homes, religious institutions that have an occupancy greater than 199 persons, public and private institutions, schools and daycare facilities, pawn shops, video game arcades, warehouses, any use selling gasoline, new construction exceeding 50,000 square feet, neighborhood impact establishments, and the storing or parking of commercial vehicles. You'll probably note that a lot of these, or some of these uses, are rather archaic, and you typically don't see video game arcades anymore. And as part of an ongoing LDR update that we are doing now, we anticipate modifying and bringing these proposed uses up to date to be more current with what we are seeing in terms of uses, particularly within different neighborhoods, including this neighborhood. Sorry about that. Conditional uses within the CD2 district. These include funeral homes, religious institutions, pawn shops, video game arcades, public and private institutions, schools, any use selling gasoline, and then of course construction exceeding 50,000 square feet, outdoor and open air entertainment establishments, neighborhood impact establishments, and the storage of commercial vehicles. The other use that's unique to this area, but no other CD2 area, is self-storage warehouses. There is a distance separation requirement of 300 feet between these uses. And to date, only one use has been proposed, and that is a use that was built in 2015, which is located between 6th and 7th Street on the east side of Alton Road. Some of the more recent approved developments by the Design Review Board in 2020 and last year include the following: a residential townhome development at 1311 15th Terrace, modifications to the design of the Flamingo project at 1420 to 1508 Bay Road, as well as the inclusion of a phasing plan. Southgate Towers got approval for a redesign of existing commercial space, new signage and landscape improvements. The Shops at West Avenue, which is across the street from Southgate Towers, they received approval for modifications to their first level storefront facades, as well as hardscape and landscape improvements and new signage. The rooftop movie theater proposed at the 1212 Lincoln Road project, that includes an outdoor bar, was also approved. The electronic super graphic, which I'll address separately, there was a separate question on that, at 1600 Alton Road was approved by the DRB. And then finally, a new 6-story multifamily building was approved at 1235 West Avenue. Some of the recently approved applications from the Planning Board include the following. The Revive Clinic at 1470 16th Street, which was conditional use approval for a small medical office and personal services uses located on the ground floor of the existing May Capri building. That also required a code amendment to allow for that type of accessory use in an R2 district. The outdoor theater at 1600 Alton Road is part of the 1212 Lincoln project That also, the approval required conditional use approval. The Firestone Miami Beach, where the Winkers restaurant used to be, that was issued a conditional use permit as a neighborhood impact establishment. And then finally, a liquor store was relocated, proposed to be from approximately 8th and Alton to 901 Alton Road, and a conditional use approval was required for a distance separation. That actual distance separation has since been eliminated by the City Commission. An ordinance was adopted on second reading at the last City Commission meeting, which removed the ability of the Planning Board to grant any future distance separation reductions, as was done here. So on the city code, we did receive a question regarding amendments to the land development regulations. And so I wanted to first sort of discuss how the city code is amended. We do have a somewhat complicated legislative process in the city of Miami Beach. And within our city code of ordinances, we have subpart B, which is commonly referred to as the land development regulations. And that's basically chapter 114 through chapter 138 of the, chapter 142 of the city code. And within the land development regulations, that includes all of our regulations pertaining to development regulations, uses, as well as all of our development review boards. Whenever an LDR amendment is proposed, there's a couple of different entities that have standing to request that. More often than not, the City Commission will refer a proposal to amend the LDRs to the Land Use and Sustainability Committee and to the Planning Board. And usually there will be a commission sponsor. However, the Planning Board and the Board of Adjustment and the Historic Preservation Board have the ability to be sponsors for LDR amendments, as well as the city manager and the city attorney. Now, with the city manager and the city attorney, they could not send an LDR amendment directly to the Planning Board. That would need to be referred by the City Commission. So the manager and the city attorney have in the past sponsored LDR amendments, but they do need to be placed on a City Commission agenda for referral. Also, persons who own property affected by the regulations that they wish to amend, who own property within the area that the amendment is proposed, they may make what is known as a private application. And those persons could basically file a private application to the Planning Board. It would go directly to the Planning Board. They would pay all the fees, provide the draft ordinance, and provide all of the required exhibits, as well as the required notice exhibits for public noticing. And then the Planning Board would transmit that, just like they would a referral from the City Commission. So in terms of process, after an item is either referred by the City Commission or a private applicant makes application to the Planning Board, the matter is heard by the Planning Board. Now, if it's referred by the Commission, typically it will go to a Commission committee, more often than not, the Land Use and Sustainability Committee, and they will make a recommendation to the Planning Board and to the Commission. However, this is not required. This is the longstanding practice of the Commission, but it's not required under the code for a Commission committee to review an LDR amendment. That's why private applicants can go straight to the Planning Board. Once the LDR amendment reaches the Planning Board, at least one Planning Board public hearing is required, and the Planning Board is required to transmit a recommendation. The Planning Board can transmit an LDR amendment with either a favorable recommendation or an unfavorable recommendation. If the Planning Board transmits an LDR amendment with a favorable recommendation, then what's known as zoning in progress is initiated. And that doesn't mean that the ordinance goes into effect. What that means is that the ordinance is not enforced against an application that either has a full building permit or obtained review or HPP approval and would otherwise be affected by that ordinance. The only way for somebody to take advantage of an actual zoning ordinance amendment is for the ordinance to be adopted by the commission. And then finally, after the planning board transmits the recommendation to the commission, the city commission will hold at least one public hearing. There are some types of LDR amendments that do require two public hearings, depending upon whether or not it involves a change of use or it involves a text amendment that affects properties of less than 10 acres. And before the ordinance can become effective, there needs to be an adoption and second reading. More importantly, unlike amendments to other sections of the city code, at least 5 affirmative votes are required to approve an LDR amendment. For non-LDR amendments to the city code, it's a 4/7 vote. So in terms of written questions, and I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the list that was provided, and I'm going to go ahead and work from that list. The first question that we got was pertaining to the land development regulation application and the difference between a commission-sponsored LDR application versus a private application, the pros and the cons, and whether or not there's an industry standard for this. So commission-sponsored amendments requires a referral by at least 4 members of the city commission. And the advantage to having a direct commission referral is that an applicant or a proposer will have an idea of whether or not there will be support for the proposed amendment before paying an expensive fee and providing application documents. If the item is not referred, or it's very controversial and doesn't look like it's going to get 5 votes, then sometimes a proposer will decide, I'm not going to move forward with that. With a private application, it goes straight to the planning board and no referral is required. However, an applicant is not going to know what the response is until they get to the commission. We really don't have an industry standard for this in terms of best practices. In my experience, most of, and certainly the lion's share of LDR amendments have been commission sponsored, either referred directly by a commissioner or at the request of an applicant. And we believe that the current process works well, having the option. There are instances where it is advantageous for somebody to make a private application. The next question that we got pertained to the Bikini Hostel with regard to the monument sign. And this sign was approved some time ago in its current location. And this research has shown that the overall size of the size complete with the sign at the time of installation. So if it's non-conforming now, it considered legally non-conforming. The sign would not be able to be altered. And if it was ever altered, then they would likely have to replace it at that time. The other question regarding the Bikini Hostel pertained to a privacy fence or hedge around the perimeter so that the tables and activities could not be reviewed. It's not required by the city code. However, the owners have indicated to our staff, and I believe they included this on one of their sets of their permit plans, to install a hedge along the perimeter because they were seeking privacy from West Avenue. As it pertains to Ricky's, there were 2 questions regarding, or there was 1 question regarding Ricky and 2 questions regarding Bottega. The first with regard to Ricky's and the application to change windows that was submitted to the DRB. I had my staff do some research, and on July 3rd of 2018, the DRB did approve the replacement of the existing fixed storefront with a new operable storefront system that included a garage door. It was DRB file 18-230. The DRB order did include a condition that the operable windows must be closed by 11 p.m. daily. So if there is a situation where the operable windows are not being closed by 11 p.m., they would be in violation of that order. You could certainly notify code compliance directly, or if you wanted to email planning, we could certainly forward that to code compliance along with a copy of the order. to I speak to the director of sanitation, Brad Kane, and he informed me of the following. There are 2 large dumpsters in the alley, a recycling container, a smaller dumpster, and a unit for cooking oil. Because there are 2 restaurants right next to each other, Bodega and the Pizza Bar, that use the container, each restaurant has its own container. Although it may seem a little cluttered as it relates to the restaurants, both need 7-day-a-week service, and they're approved for 7-day-a-week service. And after looking at the location, it was determined that there really are no other locations for these dumpsters. The city generally doesn't make changes to the solid waste licenses for service to businesses as they are requested by the haulers. Brad also indicated that if anybody has any specific questions, that he would be glad to do a virtual call with anyone that has concerns with regard to trash bins and how they're approved for their location. The sanitation department approves the trash bins. It's not the planning department. So that's why I had to reach out to the sanitation department. And then with regard to the stream of water from the rooftop air conditioners, we did reach out to the building department and the code compliance department. Apparently there is no city code requirement to locate ice machines indoors. However, the code compliance and building departments did inspect the property and confirmed that on the west side of the roof, several rooftop AC units drain into existing roof drains, which drain out onto the alley through a 4-inch PVC pipe. Others drain into a roof drain through a gutter, which also terminates in the alley. As per the building code, condensate disposal may not discharge into a street, alley, or other areas so as to cause a nuisance. And as such, they will be issuing a violation to that entity so that they repair that. If this violation is not cured, if you see this constantly a problem, you can certainly reach out to building and compliance, check on the status of that violation. As it pertains to diner at 1570, we got a question regarding the difference between occupancy load and seating. So there is a big difference. And occupancy content, as it's referred to in the code, is the total number of people that are permitted in an establishment. And that includes employees, that includes people that might be standing around, staff, people sitting down. There's a formula that is used based upon the number of exits and the square footage of the area and the area where people could potentially congregate. That occupancy content is set by the fire marshal and cannot be exceeded unless there is an increase in the occupancy load approved by the fire marshal. The maximum seating is the total number of chairs, including bar chairs, that are permitted in a given venue. So regardless of what the occupational content is, if there is a limit on seating, they cannot exceed those number of seats. And oftentimes people will limit their number of seats because a mobility fee and a parking fee is usually determined by the number of seats. And so oftentimes we find ourselves playing kind of a cat and mouse game with establishments where they'll get approval for a certain number of seats, and then they load up the seats and we count seats, and if they're over on this, they end up getting a violation. With regard to Winker's Diner being closed, we have not been advised new tenant for the Winker's Diner space. Depending upon how the operation changes, at a minimum, they will likely have to go back to the planning board for change of owner operator. And as it pertains to a 5 a.m. license, under the current code, they could obtain a 5 a.m. license. They may have to amend their planning board UP depending upon the specific conditions. But in order to limit the hours to earlier than 5 a.m., such as 2 a.m., a code amendment would be needed. So the next question pertained to the Sonder 17, 1698 West Avenue, which is the building, we commonly refer to it as the Trader Joe's building. And it is a mixed use building that was approved by the Design Review Board and received conditional use approval from the Planning Board as it exceeded 50,000 square feet. However, there is no violation of the FR. And the project is located within a CD2 district. They are permitted to have hotels and short-term rentals of residential units. The planning board approval for the CUP did not place any limits or conditions pertaining to any of the residential uses, nor is there a prohibition in the CUP on the use of transient rentals. So unless there is a specific condition in order that either prohibits hotel, and I don't think that they would be able to prohibit short-term rentals because we're preempted by the state because it's a CD2 district. There's really nothing preventing this particular project from either doing short-term rentals of residential units or operating it as a hotel. On the 1212 Lincoln Road project, the first question pertained to the 1,000 square foot LED artistic mural. As everybody is aware, this was approved by the DRB, and it was actually the size of it is actually part of a settlement agreement entered into with the city. The DRB order for this graphic expressly prohibits general commercial advertising, as does the city code. So the owner of the property is well aware that they cannot have general advertising on this electronic mural. However, they are allowed to display gallery and artistic credits. We've asked the code compliance division or department to monitor this location, and they have gone out. I've seen the graphics that have been shown, and I haven't seen anything that would contravene the order. To date, the code compliance department has not, and no violations have been issued. However, if anybody notices commercial advertising or anything other than credits for the gallery or the artist, then if you could take photos of that and send them to planning and code compliance, we can make sure that a violation is issued, because they clearly are not permitted to have advertisements for any types of commercial uses. To the parking garage parking requirements, when the project was approved, they did meet all the minimum off-street parking requirements for all the uses proposed within what has been constructed, as well as the proposed Citizen M Hotel that has yet to start construction. When they came in to propose their rooftop theater, they proposed to eliminate a number of spaces that were at the rooftop level that did not count in FAR, and that they were able to substantiate were surplus parking spaces, based upon the fact partially that the uses changed slightly at the first level from what went to the DRB and what was approved in the permit, and they had not yet constructed the hotel. We have not reviewed formally the hotel building permit application, so we cannot confirm whether or not they have a parking issue with that, but it has been my understanding that the parking required for the theater has eaten into the parking that was allocated for the hotel, and therefore they are going to be requesting some relief from that would require a code amendment. As all of you are probably aware, there is an item that has been referred to the Land Use and Sustainability Committee that would create a special zoning, a parking zone in this specific to this project. It was not referred to the planning board. It was only referred to the Land Use and Sustainability Committee. The next Land Use and Sustainability Committee is scheduled for February 11th. Whether they'll get to this item, I don't know. But if and when the Land Use Committee makes a recommendation, it will have to come back to the full commission, and the full commission would then have to decide whether they are going to refer that to the planning board, and then that would have to go through the normal LDR amendment process. As it pertains to hotels at the Southgate Apartments, we did reach out to the Customer Services Department, And they did confirm that the current BTR for 910 West Avenue, which is the Southgate Apartments, is for a 992 unit apartment building, and that the location does not have hotel BTR. In September of 2020, the property was inspected by the Code Compliance Department, and Code Compliance confirmed that the property is engaged only in apartment rentals, and they are not operating as a hotel. The property owner has been renewing the BTR with the same information for years, since they had valid hotel state years ago. However, the property no has a state hotel license, and they also do not have a hotel BTR. So they don't have a hotel BTR, and apparently the owners are not claiming hotel use at this site. With regard to parking requirements for new construction, as I think a lot of you are aware, the code was amended a few years ago to reduce the minimum off-street parking requirements for smaller residential projects in RM1 and RM2 districts. In order to increase that parking requirement, there would need to be an LDR amendment. Currently, if a proposed development wants to provide more than the minimum of 1 space per unit, they could do that. They could provide up to 2 spaces per unit without an FAR penalty. In our experience, these developers are building for a certain end user. And if they know that end user is going to have multiple cars, they'll usually build more parking spaces. However, if they know that their end user is either only going to be a 1-car family or they're not going to have a car, then they typically will not provide more vehicle storage on site than they believe that they need to. And so in order to change that requirement, an LDR amendment would be required. There was a question regarding contract zoning. It's a legal term, and it's basically spot zoning. And what the term refers to is zoning based upon a direct benefit or improvement for a single property. So if a single property comes to the city and says, hey, can you upzone me from RM1 to RM2, and I'll write you a big check to do the following, that would be considered contract zoning. That's why most zoning amendments and LDR amendments are required to apply to more than one property, even if somebody is not offering some type of benefit or improvement. As far as business licenses online, I did speak to the customer services department, and they indicated that active local business tax receipts can be viewed online on the city's online BTR directory, which is a MB Business Directory. It can be found at the city's website, miamibeachfl.gov. And they also indicated that any business engaged in transient rentals in Miami Beach must first provide proof of a state license before the BTR is issued. In addition to a state license before the BTR is issued, the business entity goes through a regulatory review process, which includes planning and zoning review for a certificate of use to ensure that the use is permitted in that zoning district, as well as a fire department inspection. We got a question regarding suite hotels. They are now prohibited, as I had indicated earlier, but there was a question as to how certain buildings were able to secure a hotel license after the laws passed. If a property obtained a building permit for a change of use to a suite hotel, and there were 4 or 5 of these that did that prior to the planning board hearing on the transmittal of the ordinance that prohibited suite hotels in the West Avenue overlay, they were permitted to continue and finalize the permit and obtain their hotel license. But there were only a limited number of these. If there was going to be a proposal to change the benchmark for grandfathering from something other than building permit or land use board approval, then an LDR amendment would be required in order to do that. And with regard to the number of suite hotels that could still be activated, that is not known. We did provide a list of existing and permitted establishments as part of the planning board memo and commission adoption of the suite hotel prohibition. We're not aware of any additional suite hotels that popped up, and nor would any permitted to be added. And then the last question on suite hotels were, are there any zoning laws that would encourage existing suite hotels to convert to residential? In our experience, because these suite hotels exist in existing older buildings, through natural, you're probably going to see a gradual conversion, because as these buildings become more expensive to maintain and the property becomes more valuable, in order to max out their existing zoning envelope, they will typically then propose to demolish the existing building, build a brand new building. That new building will have to be residential. They cannot build a new building and keep a suite hotel use. Other incentives that would likely be effective, but may not be in the interest of the area from a context standpoint, would be allowing additional height in FAR for those particular projects that agree to convert to from a suite hotel to an apartment use. The last question I have on the list pertains to the existing Ace Hardware and Epicure property on the 1600 block of Alton Road. And the question was whether or not this site was being considered for office development and the city's thoughts. And with regard to both office and whether or not the surface parking lot will be involved. To date, we've not received any application for an office project within the 1600 block. However, we have received inquiries from prospective buyers, one confirming that there was an office overlay height allowance for an all office project. Then also asking what the requirement be if they approach the city about perhaps doing a joint venture to join the parking lot. This is one of the properties under the charter that would require voter approval for any sale or lease in excess of 10 years. We think office would be a good use along this section of Alton Road. Whether or not it would make sense to include the parking lot, I think would depend largely upon the type of project proposed, whether or not existing parking that's publicly accessible is replaced and enhanced. There's a lot of different variables that go that way. And ultimately, whether or not it would be attractive for the voters, because it would eventually require voter approval if the property was sold or leased for a period in excess of 10 years. So I think I've covered all the questions that were provided. So I guess Kevin beat me to it and took away the screen share. So now, unless there's any other comments by either the board members or anybody else on the panel, I'd be happy to answer any additional questions that may not have been covered by the presentation.
I'm just, this is Mike Edwards, just firstly a thank you for going into good levels of detail around, with your presentation around city code and particularly some of the legal aspects that sit around it. So thank you for that. Thank you for answering the questions that we'd received prior to, and we may have a couple of follow-up points to raise on in a couple of those areas, and we can put that to you following this call. But thank you for responding to those. I would look at the attendees online and just open up for questions. I see Wanda has a hand up. I don't know if that's a question. The hand has been up for a little while, but take any questions from people that are on the line.
Thank you, Mike. So if for those of you who would like to participate and ask any questions, if you click the raise your hand feature at the bottom, if you're listening on a mobile device, there's 3 little dots. Click the little dots and then you'll see the raise your hand feature. And then we're going to go through all the questions. And I know I think we have a hard stop today at 7:30. You know, we're definitely going to try to answer as many questions as we can. So all I'll ask is if we could try to keep questions within a 2-minute period, so that way we could provide you with an answer. So first person, we're going to go to Wanda Tucker. And I'm going to send you a request to unmute. You just accept that, it will Wanda, we can't hear you. If you could try one more time, but I'm going to jump to our next person is Corinne. We'll come back to you, Wanda.
Good evening. Thank you for the lovely recap. I found it all very interesting. As a long residing resident of Miami Beach, I find all this very fascinating. But I'm a little bit more concerned about the planning board and the fact that they've actually taken some shortcuts, or what I think they call administrative type action, so that it doesn't go before a board, it doesn't go before the residents, and it has caused us to have some lawsuits. And I'm kind of wondering who defined the rules, what are the shortcuts, and why are the residents not allowed to know what's going on?
Corinne, can you just be a little bit more specific? Are you talking about planning board applications?
In this particular case, this would be like the building in the historic district that was allowed to become a hotel. No one in the neighborhood was aware of that. The answer came out through an investigation. I think we had a special gentleman, forgot what they call the general, that took a look at it, and that hasn't really been addressed. And it kind of bothers me that we have a planning board, we do these notices, and yet certain things seem to happen that the residents are not aware of. I can tell you, living in the city, I'm constantly surprised what pops up around me.
I think the other question there that we touched on a little earlier was in regards to, or another example was regards to Ricky's that removed a request for permission for windows and passed it through administratively. I think we touched on that earlier, but that's another example.
So I'll respond this way. The city code sets forth very clearly what can be reviewed and approved at the administrative level, either for design review or historic preservation, which is physical improvements to buildings. There are very limited sets of circumstances defined in the code for properties inside and outside of historic districts. Similarly, with regard to planning board items, virtually everything has to go before the board. Sometimes the planning board, in their conditional use approval conditions, they will delegate certain things to staff with direction. But that's also very clearly defined within the CUP. And if someone proposes something that goes outside of that, then they would have to go before the planning board to get that approved.
I just want to add one thing there. If you sometimes it could be a little complex, I guess, if you will, to follow all the different agenda items. We actually have a tool called MB Resident Connect. It's on our engagement toolbox. If you go to miamibeachfl.gov/engagement toolbox, you can find the Resident Connect. It's an email notification system. And what you do, it's a keyword search. So you can put in keywords like West Avenue, the name of your street, and it will send you agenda items related to those keywords that appear on commission committees and land use boards. So that's just an extra tool to help you stay in the know with what's coming into your neighborhood. And of course, you're represented by a great neighborhood association, the West Avenue Neighborhood Association. I'm sure they'll keep you in the loop too. So I hope that answers your question. We're going to jump to Elizabeth Latone.
Hi.
Oh, sorry, Elizabeth. Let's try that one more time.
Hi, good evening. How are you?
Hi. Hello.
Hi. I have a question regarding winkers. If it goes back before the planning board as a change of use or ownership, would it still be granted the 5 a.m. or would it have to go to 2?
So the properties on the east side of Alton Road do not have a 2 a.m. closing time now. As I'm sure everybody is aware, the city commission is going to be considering sometime in February some potential options for extending a 2 a.m. closing time to other areas of the city. If the east side of Alton Road goes to a 2 a.m. closing, then the Winkers property would also be required to close at 2 a.m. Even if they went back to the planning board and got a change of use or a change of operator, they would still be required to comply with the overall closing times for alcoholic beverage establishments.
Okay, Tom, hi, how are you?
Good.
One other question. So you would actually consider splitting the sides of the roads, for instance, East and West Washington or East and West Alton?
That's ultimately going to be a decision of the commission. At the last commission meeting that we had, a special commission meeting on January 12th, the commission gave us some direction to come back with some different options that we're still working on. And I believe what the commission wanted to see was some different geographic boundary options that they could work from. And so ultimately it will be up to the commission to decide what geographic boundaries they want to include with the 2 a.m. limit and what geographic boundaries they want to allow to go past 2 a.m.
Okay, I just thought that they were supposed to be enclosed and that kind of thing. It never occurred to me that the streets would be split in half, but you answered my question. Thank you so much. Thanks you guys for hosting this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. We're gonna go to our next person who had their hand up, and I saw it go down, so I'm just gonna check in, make sure you didn't want to speak. Alan Frank.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
So Tom, I wanted to thank you very much. It was great of you to present such a detailed presentation. And I wanted to make a comment that has perhaps less to do with you and more the city. One of the things that stands out from many of the things you said is it becomes upon the residents to see problems. And there are cities around the country that's not true. That they whether it's the other people in the city, whether it's the commissioners, whoever it is, they look for problems and look to solve them. I mean, the idea of the garbage next to Ricky's and the bodega, and it needs a resident to take pictures of that is rather frightening. It's so obvious. And there were a number of things you mentioned that are like the advertising on 1212. Many of us have seen the ads over and over, not just for the galleries and things, but ads. And for us to have to take pictures is rather remarkable. If people are saying, look, there's a problem here, you would think someone in the city would go to find the problem and go after them. And again, Tom, I'm not saying that's the planning department. It's the whole city. They seem to operate that way. And the residents, it's up to the residents. And then we have to file things with the commission and with this board and that board, and it should be the boards are attacking these problems rather than putting it back to the residents to solve them. And I saw that in 5 or 6 things about signs that are there and other things. And it'd be great if the city would relook at how they do these things and say, we should aggressively go after the problems, not wait for the residents to find them. Thank you very much. And again, thank you, Tom, for your presentation.
Thank you so much for your comments, Mr. Frank. We definitely appreciate that. And one thing I will say, when you do, and I hope it's true for your experience, when you do send us those photos, I think there is a rather quick reaction that is able to address the issues that are at hand. And we'd be happy to explore any other ideas that you have. So I'm going to go next to Mr. Ronald Starkman.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Two-part question. First, Tom, I know that you're actually working with the mayor and others perhaps on preparing some options or alternatives. What first part of the question is, are any of those options include going to say a hard 2 a.m. in the entire West Avenue area with no exceptions? And then the second is with this new legislation going through the Florida legislature, where potentially cities could be sued for lost profits by passing ordinances that are harmful to businesses. Would we have the ability to do some zoning in progress or to get ahead of that legislation?
Let me answer your second question first, because we have been advised of that. The city attorneys retained outside counsel to assist in the drafting of the different options for the commission to consider. And one of the things that they've looked at is this proposed legislation that is moving its way through the legislature. And it could very well be that because alcoholic beverages, the hours of sale of alcoholic beverages that authority is expressly granted to localities under Florida statutes. It could be that, at least as it pertains to the sale of alcoholic beverages, it could be exempt from that. Now, with that said, I would want the city attorney to comment on that formally. That's not a legal opinion. That's not a formal answer, but that is something that we are cognizant of. And I know that we're looking at that very closely. As it pertains to the different options, I think the direction that we got from the commission was to look at different geographic boundaries. We're still working on those. I don't know what the final geographic boundary recommendations are going to be as of yet. So unfortunately, I don't have any information for you in that regard. It will likely be released as a supplemental for the commission meeting on February 9th. But as soon as that information is ready, it will be released to the public.
Thank you. We're going to go next to Ms. Gail Durham.
Oh, hi.
Oh, sorry, Gail. Hold on, let's try that again. Gail, we're going to send you a request to unmute.
Okay, I unmuted finally. Mr. Mooney, you answered a bunch of questions. You mentioned a lot of things I didn't realize. I didn't know Ricky's had a DRB order for the windows, but that they have to close them at 11 o'clock. I just find it so odd of these conditional use permits go into such detail. Last week at the planning board, Mila's Restaurant is required to have the patrons call down to get their valet car before they walk down the stairs instead of waiting on the street because it might cause noise. I mean, does Miami do this? Do other cities do this, conditional use permits? And also, how do residents find out what the rules are about the venues next to their bedroom window? Is there an easier way for people to find out these rules, these specific rules that are really very specific to each separate venue? Maybe they should be posted inside the venue. What are your thoughts?
So in terms of residents finding out what the specific rules are, oftentimes it does require reaching out to the planning department or the licensing department to confirm what the venue is licensed for, and the planning department can confirm whether or not there is a CUP or a DUB order and what those conditions are. Sometimes those can evolve over time, particularly if a revision to a CUP is requested or a revision to a DRB order is requested. So we always tell people the best way to find out what the most up-to-date requirements are would be to consult with the planning department. One of the things that we are looking to do as part of our land development regulation update is to convert to a permitting platform called Gridix that is much more visually based, that would hopefully allow for people to click on a property and get that degree of information, up-to-date information. It's a work in progress, but it is something that we're working on.
Thank you so much. And we're going to go next, Enrique Montalvo.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, another question, about the street rides. Are they like showing, let's say, if I'm at, between 10th and 14th, and then when that street starts to rise up, what that will look like, compared to the sidewalks and then the entry points for the cars coming into the buildings, because now it's like if the streets are up, then they gotta drive down into the driveways and then back up, toward the building. Any drawings showing how that's gonna look?
So Enrique, and I think your question is related to, there is a West Avenue neighborhood improvement project that's coming into the area. 10th and 14th are actually two of the roads that are already raised. So when you drive through West Avenue, you kind of have those big humps, if you will.
Right.
There will be a future project that's going to raise other roads within the area. There'll be some harmonization. If you go on miamibeachfl.gov/West Ave project, there's some project information there. What I'll do, Lauren's on the call. She's your South Beach Neighborhood Affairs Manager. We'll grab the email you signed in with, and we'll send you an email so you get all the updates. Today's mostly just planning and zoning questions related to the neighborhood, but for the West Avenue neighborhood project, we're happy to, fill you in if you tell us, kind of where you live. We'll be happy to give you an update on that one separately.
Gotcha. Also,
Kevin, if I could just
Yeah.
add to that, there is a DRB application pending. It's scheduled to be considered by the Design Review Board on March 1st, and you could watch that meeting either online via Zoom, on MBTV, or attend in person. It's in the City Commission chambers, where the DRB is going to be reviewing the streetscape improvements, including the issue of the harmonization. And so if you own property on West Avenue, and you're interested specifically in harmonization, then perhaps Kevin or Lauren, you could forward Dave Martinez's contact info, because I believe he's been the point person for individual meetings with property owners regarding potential harmonization options.
So going back, so the points that 10th Street was already raised, 14 was already raised. In between that street is going to stay the way it is then? It's not going to be touched?
No, so the current, and again, this is all within the larger project. So that street that is in between 10th and 14th, that's West Avenue itself. Then you have different side streets. Those are all planned to be raised to the new elevation. And then the harmonization will be, that's the harmonization is what takes place from the road to the private property. So like Mr. Mooney said, on March 1st, tune into Planning Board. I'll make sure we email you right after the meeting so we connect, and we'll be happy to answer all questions related to that project.
And Enrique, I would just encourage you as well. There's some additional commentary and feedback and observations that the WAFNA board have added to our website, and following some discussions that we've also had with some of the local residents. So I would encourage you to consume that information as well as it pertains to the meeting on March the 1st.
Thank you so much. And our last question, and every time I say this, people realize their hands aren't up. So if you want to speak, if you want to ask a question, please click the raise your hand feature now. If you're on a mobile device, you click the three dots, then you'll see the menu and you can raise your hand that way. So we're going to go to our last caller, Miss Catherine Townsend. Catherine? Catherine, you're muted, so we're going to send you a request to
Oh,
unmute. There
hey,
you go.
sorry. Hi.
Hi there.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation and for taking my question. I think it may actually have been answered just by the response to the previous attendee regarding the neighborhood improvement project. Essentially, wondering about the West Avenue bike lanes specifically, and then in general, as these roads are being raised and we're doing this kind of road work, how much can we integrate bike lanes into our communities so that we can amp up our cycling infrastructure? It's good for everything. So I guess just putting that out there, but it sounds like that might be something I can find out more about from the March 1st meeting.
A little bit, and also that the project plans are simultaneously in the works. There have been a series of discussions about bike lanes and the layout of the road. I would encourage you, if you send me an email, I can share information with you about bike lanes specifically. If you tell me your building or your residence address, I would also like to add to the previous comments, each harmonization agreement is a unique agreement depending on a property layout. So all of that varies by which segment you're in and where exactly your property is.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. I'm on Bay Road, so
we'll get your email that you registered with, and then we'll connect with you separately.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Kevin. Thank you.
And then our last caller is actually Mr. Alan Frank. I think you maybe you have a follow-up there.
Sorry, it was answered before, so no problem. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Kevin, I would just say before we wrap up, just two things. One, in response to your comment earlier, your ask earlier around the advertising sign on 1212. One idea that can shift the responsibility, I think it was Alan's question, shift the responsibility from residents to the owners, or just broader than just making it a resident issue. We could require that the owners provide at least the sequencing details for ads for things that are running on that screen. That's something that is programmed ahead of time, and I would think would be a low effort ask to provide on a weekly or a monthly basis, again, just to create some visibility of the intent of things that are running on that screen.
We actually have that, Mike, because when that was approved by the DRB, it was approved expressly with the types of images that could be shown. And I understand that people don't want to be burdened with that. And we have asked the code compliance department to monitor that. So the officers that are assigned to that area, they're looking. And if they see general advertising, they will definitely note it and then issue a violation. The issue is that oftentimes they can't be there 24/7. And so our ask was just, if you happen to see it, if you could video it, photograph it to us, that's the best form of evidence. And that way it's irrefutable. If I see it or my staff sees it, yeah, we'll note it and we'll let code enforcement know. But none of us can be there 24/7 looking at it. And with digital imagery like that, it's not difficult to sneak in some general advertising.
Right. Thank you, Tom. I'm just going to take this opportunity, we're in a public forum, to thank Gail Durham for everything that she has done for WAVNA as a co-founder and president. She steps down this week. So I want to go on record thanking Gail for her contribution. She steps now into a role within the planning board itself, so she will be able to advocate not just for the residents of West Avenue, but for the residents of Miami Beach. Gail, we wish you well in that endeavor. We know that you remain close friends, and we look forward to partnering with you now in your role on the planning board. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards, and thank you everybody for participating this evening. I see Commissioner Minor does have his hand up, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute him there. I think he's going to be rejoining in a quick second. Commissioner?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone, Tom, you, and everyone that called in. This was a great meeting. And basically, the reason why I even brought this item, I saw these, a few different areas, but certainly the short-term rentals in the South of Fifth neighborhood got me realizing that the more our residents know and can be proactive, the better we're going to be. And I think one of the callers mentioned, I think it's a good point that sometimes, and I feel the same way, sometimes maybe we should, as commissioners and staff, notice things, but we really are reliant on our residents, and the West Avenue Neighborhood Association is a great tool. And thanks for all you do. But really, the more you know about what's going on, planning, zoning, different projects, the more we can be prepared. And it really does make there sometimes 5 or 10 emails. It's hard to believe because we do get so many emails, but 5 or 10 emails on a project can actually impact and sway decisions. So being active is really important. And obviously you can't be active unless you know about it. And that holds true for us as commissioners. Sometimes things come up that I wish I knew about sooner. So I think these will be helpful for me as well. So thank you all. And thanks, Tom, for the great presentation.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. And with that, thank you to everybody. Thanks, Gail, again for your service to the West Avenue group. You helped us organize this meeting tonight. I think we had a few members on from other HOAs. If you are interested in having a planning and zoning related to your neighborhood, we are going to follow up and try to get these in the books. So thank you, everybody, for your time this evening, and have a great night.